an update from the William Sheehan Lab for Economic Opportunities. I'm Bill Sermons. I'll be hosting this webinar today. And I wanted to just cover a few logistics before we get started. The webinar today is being recorded, so please mute your phone lines or your computer speakers. You may use the chat feature for comments or questions during the presentation, and we will pose those questions to our speaker as those come in, or more likely wait till the end. And we will have a Q&A at the end, and the lines will be muted at that time, so we will be providing those questions to the speaker. I just wanted to clarify that. And any questions that come up that aren't able to be addressed during the webinar, if we need to do follow-up, you can receive an email response for those. So our speaker today is James Sullivan, who is the Reverend Thomas McDonough Associate Professor of Economics at Notre Dame. In 2012, together with colleague Bill Evans, Jim co-founded the William Sheehan Lab for Economic Opportunities, called LEO. LEO is a research center in the Department of Economics at the University of Notre Dame that conducts rigorous and peer-reviewed evaluations of Catholic Charities interventions like the Homelessness Prevention Call Center operated by Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Chicago. LEO is also conducting ongoing evaluations of other Catholic Charities interventions. I will now turn the presentation over to Jim Sullivan, who will lead you through a presentation that will cover an update on LEO, an introduction to what LEO is, and some other topics around barriers and partnering with LEO. So I'll turn it over to Jim.
Great. Just to confirm, Bill, you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks to all who have joined in. I see there's actually a good number of you joining in on the webinar. As Bill mentioned, I'm Jim Sullivan. I'm a professor of economics at the University of Notre Dame and director of the Wilson Sheehan Lab for Economic Opportunities. I think one of the impetuses for this webinar is that Catholic Charities USA had received a few inquiries about, we'd heard a little bit about LEO a while back, and we're just wondering what's been going on lately. So I'm very appreciative to have an opportunity to kind of update you on the work that we're doing. And I know that most of you are at least aware of what LEO is and what we do, but just in case there are a few of you that are a little new to LEO, I'm going to do a very quick overview of what it is we do. So before I get into the updates, let me talk a little bit about big picture what we do at LEO. So this is a research center that's fairly young. We launched in 2012 that aims to evaluate the impact of domestic anti-poverty programs, predominantly by partnering with social service providers at the local level. And as Bill mentioned, our anchor partner in this initiative is the Catholic Charities Network. It really grew out of a relationship that Notre Dame had with Catholic Charities USA and has blossomed from there. We describe our vision for the center as reducing poverty and improving lives through evidence-based programs and policies. But that's a very broad vision, and one might naturally ask, well, how exactly are you going to do that? So when I talk about what it exactly is that we do at LEO, I usually emphasize three main activities. One of the things we learned through our initial site visits to Catholic Charities agencies was that there was a fair amount of interest in being able to build a broader set of evidence on the impact of the programs that agencies were running. There was interest in partnering with researchers, in other words, to measure the impact of their programs. And we were also aware that there were researchers who work in this area that would very much like to have access to the data and programs and be involved in these kinds of research projects, and that a real problem was that these two spheres that had a shared interest weren't interacting. And so a big part of what we do at LEO is match researchers with providers so that we can conduct impact evaluations. So when we do make a match, the goal is to evaluate the impact of a particular intervention. And this can mean a lot of different things. You'll hear me say things like an RCT, a randomized controlled trial, which is viewed as the gold standard approach for measuring impact. But another important point to make is that when we can't do an RCT, there are other approaches that mimic an RCT that oftentimes generate nearly as credible evidence and leverages data that you all already collect. And I'm going to give some specific examples there so people understand that distinction. Once we've evaluated a program, it's to have broad impact, it's important to disseminate that information. And so here at the center, we work to make sure that the information learned from these impact evaluations is disseminated to policymakers as well as to other providers. And here's the part where Catholic Charities USA plays a really important role, both with their connections with policymakers, but also to the broad network of providers in the Catholic Charities network. And I'll give specific examples again of that as well. So that's kind of what we do at LEO. What I was hoping to cover today in terms of giving you an update, I wanted to do a few things. So first, I wanted to update you on some of our most developed or completed projects. You may have heard Bill reference the Homelessness Prevention Call Center, and I'm going to give you just a quick update on the findings for that report, and then mention another evaluation, the Stay the Course program at Catholic Charities Fort Worth, where we have 6-semester results. I'll present some results that haven't yet been released broadly, but will soon be part of a final research report. And after I've kind of highlighted those, I want to talk about some new projects. So there are a number of different projects I could highlight. We're at about 20 projects that are at various stages of development that are in the pipeline. But I've picked these 3 to highlight mainly because each demonstrates a different approach to an impact evaluation. So they use different research designs. And then there's some key lessons from all this. I think it's helpful if you're considering getting involved in an impact evaluation of understanding what the key barriers are. So if those things can be addressed in advance, that's always helpful. And then, once you have this better understanding of what it is we do and what we're looking for, I'll talk a little bit about how if you're ready to get involved, how you could get involved with LEO. So that's the plan for today, and I thought I would just start by highlighting the first of our completed projects, the Homelessness Prevention Call Center. Now, to motivate this, as many of you are aware, homelessness is a vexing and persistent problem in the U.S. We have, at a point in time in the winter, we have about 600,000 individuals that are homeless. Nearly a quarter of those individuals are under 18. If you look over the course of a year, we're talking about upwards of 3 million individuals who experience a spell of homelessness. And that doesn't count the many millions who are on the brink of homelessness or are doubled up for financial reasons. So this is an important problem that many Catholic Charities agencies are addressing in one way or another. A common approach is to try and prevent the homelessness in the first place. And so that is the focus of many call centers, and one example of that is the Homelessness Prevention Call Center in Chicago. Now, if you are about to get evicted from your apartment in Chicago, you call 311 and they will route you to the Homelessness Prevention Call Center. And the call center processes the call to determine whether or not they are eligible. So there are a number of eligibility criteria. And after they screen for eligibility, they determine whether or not any of the funding agencies currently have resources to provide assistance. This might be 1 month's rent, help with utilities, or a security deposit, for example. And there's a couple of features of that process that really make this amenable to a research project. The first is that this centralized intake. So there's one spot that has all the information of potential clients. What they do at the call center is collect information to determine eligibility, and then in their data they have information about who among the callers are eligible and who among the callers are not eligible. And so we can get the eligible population. Now within that population, they also have in their data who gets referred to services and who does not get referred to services. And that allows us to determine who's in the treatment group that receives the services and who does not. That's a key distinction from a lot of programs, is that they have data on individuals who were not served, but if there was additional capacity, they would have been served. And that's precisely the group we're looking for when we're trying to construct a comparison group against which we can compare outcomes to see what the impact of the program is. So when we first learned about this program from Catholic Charities Chicago, we said, this is great. You essentially have what we call a quasi-experimental study, a natural experiment, they sometimes call. All we need is an outcome. And it would be great to get information on whether or not these callers subsequently become homeless. And that's when Catholic Charities Chicago introduced us to All Chicago, which is the HMIS administrator that have all the data on who checks into a homeless shelter in HUD-funded shelters in the city of Chicago. And so that gave us the outcome. So we were able to link the call center data to the data on who checks into a homeless shelter. And then we could address this question, whether or not when you call on a day when funds are available, that you're less likely to become homeless than if you call on a day when funds are not available. Now, critical for this to work is that whether or not funds are available has to be somewhat random. It has to be like you're flipping a coin. And we were able to look at the characteristics of callers and determine that in fact was true. People who call on a day when funds are available and they're eligible look just like the people who call on days when funds are not available amongst the eligibles. And so what we did is we linked the data and we looked to see if you were less likely to show up in a homeless shelter if you called on a day when funds were available. And let me just present to you our main results from that study. If you look at the group of people who were eligible for funds, but they were unlucky and that they called when funds were not available, a little over 2% of them show up in a homeless shelter 6 months later, within the next 6 months. If you look at the group that called on a day, they were lucky enough to call when funds were available, it's about 0.5%. Now this difference is the key. That's the impact of access to these funds, is a decrease of 76% in the likelihood of becoming homeless. And that's a very large effect for a very important outcome, whether or not somebody becomes homeless. Because of the nature of this design, of the research design, and the broad interest in this kind of intervention and the importance of this problem, this study was picked up by the journal Science, which is one of the most high-profile journals in all of academia. And that's great for us as academics, but a point that I like to make is that this is also great for the project and great for the providers, because it came out in Science, it attracted broad attention in circles that it might not, the research study might not otherwise attract attention. So when this came out, we did a number of interviews, both in radio and print media and online media on the study. I did those individually and in partnership with Catholic Charities of Chicago. Catholic Charities USA became involved at this point to help us disseminate, and they organized a Capitol Hill briefing. So I went to DC along with Monsignor Boland and representatives from Catholic Charities USA. We presented in front of representatives from both the House and the Senate, from staffs from both sides, and we shared with them both the intervention and the findings. Now, ideally, I'd like to tell you that the state of Illinois decided to increase funding for this program because of the evidence, but unfortunately, I can't tell you that. But if you're at all aware of Illinois' budget woes, I think it's a victory to to say that they haven't cut this program while they've cut so many other programs. I will say another important impact of this is that it attracted the attention of other providers who are running similar programs. And so we have received a number of inquiries from cities all across the country who are interested in understanding the impact of their homelessness prevention programs. And in fact, we're in the process of evaluating a homelessness prevention effort in Santa Clara County, and we hope to launch that impact evaluation this summer. So that's just one example. Let me share one other example, but just to highlight the differences. This was an example of an impact evaluation that we did that was not a randomized controlled trial. In fact, it's what we call a retrospective study, in that we didn't get involved in the enrollment procedure at all. The only thing we asked of Catholic Charities Chicago was to turn over the data and give us access to introduce us to all Chicago so we could get access to the outcomes. I admit that alone is a big ask, because they had to help us understand the data and how it works, but we didn't have to intervene in the intervention at all. Another approach is to evaluate a program by a randomized controlled trial, and one project where we have completed project and results is in the area of community college, degree completion and persistence in college. Let me start with kind of the issue here, which is that it's well documented that there's a high return on investment with going to a community college. Your community college graduates are much more likely to be employed than high school graduates. They're much more likely to be stably employed, and their earnings are upwards of 25% higher than those for high school graduates. This all makes community college seem like an effective tool for reducing poverty. An important problem here is that the vast majority of students who go to community college never finish their intended degree. We're partnering with Tarrant County College in Fort Worth, Texas, where only 8% of first-time, full-time enrollees ever complete their intended degree over the next 6 years. Why is that the case? The typical focus has been on two explanations. One is financial resources, that the students don't have enough resources to cover tuition. And the other is academic preparation, that the students don't have the appropriate academic preparation to be prepared to succeed in college. Now, both of those are important issues, but when we looked into this more closely in partnership with Catholic Charities Fort Worth, it became clear that there's another really important issue that is oftentimes overlooked. And putting it simply, it's that life gets in the way. Oftentimes it can be simple events that happen to individuals that set them off course. They lose their job, their car breaks down, they lose child care or have to take care of a sick parent, and as a result they stop attending classes, eventually drop out that semester, and they never get back on course. Addressing those kind of needs is exactly the kind of work that Catholic Charities agencies are really good at. And Catholic Charities of Fort Worth has designed a program that is meant to exactly address those needs. And that program is called Stay the Course. It's a coaching and mentoring program that is customized to address the needs of community college students. They enroll the student, and at enrollment they have a customized service plan that identifies potential barriers to success in college, and then they have a plan for how they're going to address those barriers, with a focus on how they can persist in school and complete their degree. There also is an emergency financial assistance component of this intervention that is there to address one-time financial emergencies. And the question is, does an intervention like this actually improve academic outcomes? And so to answer that question, we launched, in partnership with Catholic Charities Fort Worth, a randomized controlled trial. And specifically, we recruited students to be part of this program. When they express interest, we randomly assigned them to either the treatment or control group. And then in partnership with Tarrant County College, we got academic outcomes on both groups of students, and we could measure whether or not, 2 semesters, 4 semesters, 6 semesters after this intervention, what is the difference in academic outcomes for those that participate and stay the course as compared to those in the control group. And then just to show you the kind of the key results from this study, from the randomized controlled trial, the purple bars in this figure show the first set shows the fraction of stay the course participants that are still active in school. The gold ones in that first set show the fraction for the, maybe I can highlight it with my mouse, this is the fraction for the control group. And what you see is that about 25% of the control group, 6 semesters after the original assignment to either treatment or control in fall of 2013, are still in school. But nearly double the stay the course participants are still in school. So we see this very large effect on the likelihood that you're persisting in school 6 semesters after assignment. Now, at that point, we're already seeing some students obtaining their intended degree. If you look at the control group, 6 semesters later, we see that it's about 6 or 7% have obtained a degree, and they're converging towards that 8% that I mentioned, so a very low degree completion rate. But if you look at the completion rate for those that are stay the course participants, it's nearly 4 times as high. And so this is really encouraging evidence of the impact of the program. And we also, in doing evaluations, we often dig deeper into, what are the mechanisms by which the program works and who is it working for the best. And one of the things that stuck out in our additional analyses is that the program appears to be particularly effective for females, where we're seeing a very large impact in the likelihood that they stay in school and a much larger effect for females in terms of the likelihood that they've earned a degree. Now, this kind of RCT evidence it can be very persuasive, and what I'd like to point out is kind of the impact we are already seeing. Our plan is to submit this as a research article this coming summer, so you can look for these results in print sometime soon, we hope. But we've already seen some impact of this evidence, and let me just highlight a couple of these things. One is that the local agency, Catholic Charities Fort Worth, has been able to leverage this evidence to garner support from local foundations, local benefactors, and they're starting to communicate directly with some national foundations. In particular, there's some growing interest from some national foundations to invest in scaling up and replicating stay the course at many sites. Catholic Charities Fort Worth was able to get local funding to scale it up to another campus in Fort Worth. They are looking into scaling it up, replicating and scaling it up in Dallas. But these national foundations are expressing interest in playing a role in replicating this in several sites all across the country. So we're optimistic that leveraging the strong evidence of impact that we can get support for replicating this program elsewhere. So stay tuned. If we're successful in that, you'll probably be hearing more about these replication efforts. So that's kind of a quick overview of completed projects. The main part of what I want to cover today is what's new. And I've picked a few projects to highlight among the 20 or so ongoing. And as I mentioned, I've picked these projects mostly because they differ in the approaches that they take for evaluating impact. And so let me start with a project called Returning Home Ohio. And this is a project that's actually our agency partner is not a part of the Catholic Charities Network, but I thought I'd talk about this one because it seems to be close to the work that a lot of Catholic Charities agencies are doing in the area of permanent supportive housing. So Returning Home Ohio is a collaboration of local communities in Ohio and the corrections facilities, as well as the Corporation for Supportive Housing and local service providers. And what it is it's a supportive housing intervention for ex-offenders, and it really targets high-risk individuals. So they have to demonstrate a mental illness or other disability, addiction, HIV/AIDS qualifies, or they're identified as very high risk of homelessness. And these individuals are provided housing as well as supportive services, and there's a very individualized service plan provided to these individuals. This program has been going on since 2007, and they currently serve about 200 offenders, ex-offenders at any given time. And it would be really hard to do an RCT in this context because only a few units become available each year, and so the enrollment in the program would be very slow. But they've been doing this for many years, upwards of 10 years now, and the nature of the enrollment really has allowed us to do a retrospective study. So I wanted to highlight some key features of why this is the kind of study that that works well for partnering with LEO. And this is going to sound a lot like the HPCC study, the Homelessness Prevention Call Center, in that it's a retrospective study. We aren't getting involved in the enrollment process at all. They're going to hand over data of people who are served in a comparison group. It turns out that there are many more ex-offenders who qualify for this supportive housing services than the 200 units they have available. So and sometimes you get it and sometimes you don't, and it turns out that whether or not you get a unit is essentially a luck of the draw. If you happen to be being discharged from a facility, from a jail or from a prison at a time when a unit is available, you get assigned a unit. If you are released at a time when a unit's not available, then you don't get the unit. And so what we needed from the provider was data on people who actually get served, data on people who don't get served but are eligible because of their mental illness or other high-risk category. And they had just that. So they have information on both a treatment group and a comparison group. And the whether or not a spot available is functionally random. So it's very similar to this idea of you call the call center and sometimes there are funds and sometimes they are not, and it's not a function of the fact that you're in greater need. There's a broad eligible population and only some get the services. Now, we also need, as was the case with the Homelessness Prevention Call Center, we need information on an outcome. And here, partnering with the Department of Corrections in Ohio that works closely with the Corporation for Supportive Housing and local service providers gives us access to the key outcome that we're interested in, which is reducing recidivism. So does providing this kind of service really reduce recidivism? And if the answer is yes, that would be really encouraging because we know that recidivism leads to very high societal costs in addition to private costs. And so ability to move the needle on recidivism would be of broad interest to policymakers and other providers. And the nice thing is once we're able to get the data sharing agreements in place, and we're in the process of doing that now, we can do the analysis. We don't have to wait for the clients to be served to observe the outcomes because it's a retrospective study, and we'll be able to measure the impact of the services they've provided in the past. Let me move on to another intervention that is very much in the developing stage. It is going to be a randomized controlled trial, and it is with a Catholic Charities agency. It's the CORAL program, which is an after-school program. It stands for Communities Organizing Resources to Advance Learning. And it's a partnership with Catholic Charities of Santa Clara and the Franklin McKinley School District. And this is a program that they've been running for a number of years now that is offered to students K through 8. It targets very high need students, very at risk of falling behind in school and having low test scores. And the after-school program offers literacy assistance, homework, assistance, a number of enrichment activities, sports and dance, etc. But also they work with a teacher who is attentive to what other needs the student might have, in particular if there are problems or issues going on at home or with school. And the question is, does this kind of intervention actually have an impact on key outcomes, like does it improve academic performance and other outcomes we might be interested in for these individuals. Now, we've been in conversations with Coral in Santa Clara, Catholic Charities of Santa Clara County, for a number of years to try and figure out the best way to evaluate this. And I picked this one because it's a nice story of what we try to do here at LEO, which is that there's the gold standard approach, but that of running an RCT in the purest form, and then sometimes the gold standard approach simply won't work. And so what we try to do is say, okay, how can we meet your needs as they work in the real world? And so the issue with Coral was that they get referrals for special cases from the principals of various schools and other leaders at the various schools. And so Coral was very reluctant to say, let's do an RCT, because they didn't want to tell the principals that the students that they identified couldn't be part of the program. And what we've realized is that it's a fairly small number of students that would fall into that category. And so it's fairly straightforward to accommodate that concern in a context where we still operate an RCT. So one of the key features of this RCT is that we're going to be able to accommodate these special cases. And so to be more specific there, what we're going to do is we're going to allow these special cases, these referrals, to be assigned to Coral, and they participate in the program. They're just not part of the study. And then for the remaining slots, there are far too many kids who are eligible, would be in need and of interest in this program, then they can serve. And so how do we select the students that actually are served? We're going to take the eligible student population and allocate from that population who gets the services in the most fair way possible, which would be to select these kids at random. And then we're going to track outcomes for those kids over time. And because this is a close partnership with the Franklin McKinley School District, we have an easy outcome. So we're going to link the kids who, whether or not they participate or are in the treatment or control group, that data to information on their reading test scores to determine whether or not this kind of literacy and after-school support really has an effect on academic outcomes. Over the long haul, we might look at whether or not they stay on grade, other academic outcomes, and then maybe even look outside the school. One potential benefit of a program like this is what we might refer to as an incapacitation effect, is that if these kids are involved in an after-school program, then that means they're less likely to be involved in other activities that we might not want them to be involved in. So they're less likely to be in the juvenile justice system as a result of this program. These are things that we would hope to look at over the long haul. So that's the Coral program. The last example that I'm going to share with you before I talk about some barriers and how to get involved is the Nightingale Respite Program. That is a program that was designed and is implemented by Catholic Charities Santa Rosa, but they're partnering with a number of hospitals in their community and Sonoma County Department of Health Services. And some of you, I know we've presented an early version of this to at an annual gathering. This is a program where we are currently live we're collecting data and enrolling clients. I picked this program because I wanted to emphasize an example where it's not a retrospective study. We're actually, we've tweaked the enrollment process, but it's also not a randomized control trial. So in this example, first let me talk about the Nightingale. You know, the problem here is that the issue that's being addressed is that you have homeless individuals that when they're discharged from the hospital and they have no support in terms of housing and other services when they're discharged, oftentimes show back up at the hospital all too often. This is obviously a bad outcome for the individual, but this is a big concern to the hospitals too, because they get charged, and if it's within 30 days, the fees can be high from Medicaid on those kinds of readmissions. So there's this intervention that was defined that is to provide a respite center for homeless individuals being discharged from the hospital. They have a comfortable, safe place to stay. They're given 3 meals a day. And in addition to that, they receive modest health services and case management to address some of their other needs. And the real goal here is to improve health and to reduce hospital admissions. And the hope is that if we can show in a rigorous way that the intervention does just that, then the hospitals would be very interested in funding a program like this because it could improve their bottom line. So not only could it improve outcomes for homeless individuals, but also improve outcomes for hospitals, which would subsequently provide you know, a sustainability model for this. The funding could come through the hospitals. As I mentioned, this is not an RCT. To understand what we do, let me talk about what used to happen. The local hospitals would identify a homeless individual that was eligible to be placed in Nightingale at discharge. They would call over to Nightingale, and if Nightingale had a bed, they'd place them in Nightingale. If Nightingale didn't have a bed, then there was no information entered into the system about them being eligible for Nightingale. In other words, we had information on the treatment group, who was being served, but we really had no information on a comparison group because we didn't know who at that same time would have been eligible, but they didn't get assigned to Nightingale because there wasn't a bed. So the tweak in the process is we said, how about when you consider the discharge of a patient who would be eligible for Nightingale, you record specific information even in the case when there's not a bed. And so when there's not a bed, they're placed on a wait list, and we want to record that information and make sure that anybody who's eligible, even if there's a wait list, we at least record them so that we can include them in the comparison group. And we've got the hospitals on board, and the hospitals are willing to share very sensitive data like hospital readmissions because this is really important to them. And so the partnership with the hospital is going to enable us to measure these outcomes on whether or not they're more likely to be readmitted to the hospital later on. It's not a RCT. We're not flipping a coin for whether or not they get a bed. So where does the randomness come from? Well, it turns out the timing of your discharge is independent of whether or not there happens to be a bed at Nightingale. So it's again luck of the draw. Sometimes there's a bed available and sometimes there's not. And so we're going to use that natural variation to generate a treatment and control group and compare outcomes across these two groups. And the other point that I should make about this program is some of you may be concerned that you can't work with Leo because you're a really small program. Nightingale has 13 beds. They don't serve a lot of individuals at any one point in time, but over time they do serve a lot of individuals. So just because they're small doesn't mean that we can't generate a large sample size because the treatment period is fairly short. So Nightingale serves hundreds of individuals each year. So we'll collect information over an extended period of time, and that's going to allow us to build a sample for the treatment and control group large enough to estimate the impact of this program. So stay tuned. We hope to have results from that in 2020, preliminary results of that in 2018. So that's the Nightingale program. I'm happy to talk about other programs or any questions that you may have, but let me make a few other points about partnering with Leo. And the first point I want to make is just it's really helpful for potential partners to understand what the key barriers are. This could save you a lot of time in terms of getting too far down the road in an evaluation. Maybe some of these barriers you can address in advance, or maybe we can help you address them. But there are many. The three most common that we've identified in our partnerships to date, I'm going to highlight. So the first is sample size, and I've already alluded to this. It's really important to have a substantial sample size, and we get the question all the time of, well, how big does the program have to be? And that's a hard question because it depends on what is the effect size that you want to measure. The larger the sample, the smaller an effect size you can precisely measure. And it also depends on the distribution of the outcome. So how frequently, in the case of, say, recidivism, how frequently does recidivism occur? We usually get baseline data to estimate that, and we can give you a specific answer. But, for now, just ballparking it, if we're talking about 20, 40, 60, maybe even 100 individuals that are served over the course of a year, that's really on the small side. If you're patient and willing to stack things over a number of years, it might be feasible. But that's on the small side. Ideally, we're talking about interventions that over a reasonable period of time are serving a couple of hundred, and the bigger the better. But it's helpful to understand kind of what the general needs are here, because there simply are many great programs we would love to evaluate that we can't because they're too small. Another critical point that I've alluded to in the examples I talked through is excess demand. The key way that we identify a comparison group is through excess demand. So we have clients who are interested in the program, maybe they've applied for the program, we can identify that they're eligible, and you simply can't serve them because you don't have the resources to serve everybody in need. The lack of excess demand is a big challenge for us. And one of the reasons why I think there's lack of excess demand is not because there aren't individuals out there that would like to participate in the program, but that sometimes the agencies don't want to advertise the program so broadly that they get such a long waiting list. And so we kind of need that waiting list, or we need that excess demand. We need to know who are those people that would like to be served, but they simply can't because there is insufficient resources. So in some sense, there might be ways for programs that currently don't run a waiting list at all or have excess demand to generate a little bit of excess demand by advertising the program a little bit. And I understand that doesn't always work in every case, but that's something that's important to consider. Probably the other most important barrier to a successful evaluation is having outcome data. So agencies tend to have good data on the individuals that they serve while they're serving them. They're less likely to have information on the individuals that they don't serve, in other words, the comparison group, or even outcomes for information on the individuals they serve after the service is completed. The most promising way to get outcome data is through administrative data. That's information that's already collected in other sources. The intake data from homeless shelters is an example in the call center case. The academic outcomes in the case of Stay the Course, or in the case of Coral, the recidivism outcomes in the case of Returning Home Ohio, those are all administrative data, is how we're measuring outcomes. In fact, even the Nightingale program is using hospital administrative data. Every example I've shared with you is using administrative data. We do have studies where we use survey data. we try and track these individuals down both in the treatment and control. It is feasible. It's a lot more expensive, and that's the reason why we really try to focus on accessing administrative data. Here's probably a case where Leo can really play a big role. Oftentimes the administrative data are out there and the providers don't know about it, so we can help you track down the right administrative data. One example I'll give is UI earnings records. States have records on employment and earnings for every individual in the formal labor market. We can link program data in many cases to the UI earnings records to measure that critically important outcome. Are they working, and what are their earnings? So I want to turn it over to you all, but before I do that, let me make just one last slide here on if you're interested in getting involved, what does that process look like? And so let me start kind of from the beginning, the getting started. We've, if you haven't talked to us in a while, you're probably not aware of this, but we've put together a lot of materials to make this process more standard and smooth it out a bit. And so we've put together a sheet that helps you see what are like key things you want to consider. So we list 6 key things to consider upfront for determining whether or not this might be a good match for you. You'll see that I've listed here that we have an initial worksheet. We want to avoid having agencies fill out worksheets in cases where the program simply might not be feasible. We don't want individuals spending time on this if it's not going to be a good match. So we're trying to do some pre-screening here to avoid that, to help you kind of see when there's a good match. Oftentimes, if you've looked through that document and you say, hey, that sounds like it's a good match for us, we'll have an introductory call to just talk about the program, talk about potential evaluation options, and talk about what the criteria are and the next steps. And usually what comes out of that call, if things seem to look promising, as we say, how about filling out this initial worksheet, then we will take a deeper dive into the program, look at the worksheet, and oftentimes schedule subsequent calls, which then lead to kind of moving towards an active project. The worksheet's not too daunting. It's about 4 to 5 pages, but you know, it's no sense in filling it out if it's not going to be a good match. Sometimes the best way to learn whether or not it's a good match is to take a look at that worksheet. So how do you get all that? One of the things we've done to really help with this bringing on new projects is we've hired Wendy Moreno, who's an associate director here at Leo in charge of project development. You should feel welcome to contact Wendy at any time to kind of explore these possibilities, but you're also welcome to go on the website and take a look at the information that we have there. Wendy would be happy to provide any of you with the resources and the materials you would need to kind of consider the next steps. So that's all I've prepared. So I think I'll turn it over now to Q&A, and maybe Bill, I'll let you run the Q&A part.
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Jim. One of the things, one of the first questions that we did receive, I think the first question I wanted to address, because it's a broader question about the availability of the slides. So there's 2 ways to get access to the slides. If you go to your control screen on the sort of right panel of your monitor, you should see a handouts tab that says 105. And then it'll have a PDF that says update from the Lab for Economic Opportunities, and you can drag that to your desktop and be able to look at that there for the slides. We also will be, everybody who's registered, including people who are on the call and people who registered and couldn't make it, will be sending out an email that will include a PDF with the presentations on it as well. So, yeah, so you'll be able to get that in both of those ways. So I just wanted to say that. But there's another question that also came in that I'll just sort of read it as it is. Do you do anything like developmental evaluation or qualitative analysis for more emergent, innovative program efforts or primarily traditional research and evaluation design?
So we are really focused at this point on what we call top-tier impact evaluation. So programs that are a good fit for an RCT or something that mimics an RCT. And we recognize that that's, a small subset of all promising innovative programs. So not all will be part of, will fit with that. In the context of our impact evaluations, we oftentimes bring on qualitative researchers to do complementary analysis and evaluation. And in both the Stay the Course and another project we have with Catholic Charities Fort Worth, we have a qualitative researcher from the University of Chicago who's exploring, student navigator interactions and looking at possible mechanisms. I think that the question here was, well, if you can't do anything that's top tier impact, does Leo get involved in other types of evaluations? And the answer right now is kind of a qualified no. We really are focused on this particular type of impact evaluation, but I qualify it because sometimes the goal is to get to an RCT or to get to a nice quasi-random natural experiment, but you're not quite there yet. But there's considerable promise of getting there, and we will often get involved in those kinds of projects to help maybe provide with technical assistance and in some cases provide some preliminary evaluation work so that we can get them to the point of doing a top-tier impact evaluation.
Okay, a question that came in about who pays to do an RCT or an impact evaluation?
That's a great question. Yeah, I sometimes, because it comes up so often, sometimes I just go ahead and talk about it in the presentation. But so we look at it as, we sometimes refer to this as kind of a cost recovery model, and that there are costs that we bear because of the evaluation, and we don't anticipate that the provider is going to be able to cover those costs. And so what we do is we seek funding for these evaluations from national foundations, local foundations, and government agencies like the National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, and the Institute for Educational Sciences. And this kind of speaks to our selection process in large part. So we choose projects and we focus on projects where there is a rigorous research design, because those are the projects that we can get funded from these external providers, the external funders, so the foundations and government agencies. I'm a little hesitant to say that these are free for all providers, because we do ask the provider partners to help us in this initiative. So when there are local foundations that might be interested in funding research, we collaborate with the local provider to seek funding to support our research. But similarly, when there are national foundations that we work with that are interested in funding interventions, we have brought the provider partner in on the grant and gotten and raised resources for the provider partner. We have found that by partnering with the provider, the academic and provider partnering together to raise resources, we've both been more successful. So it's kind of a win-win by bringing both to the table.
Let's see, I think we have time for one more question. So there are two questions about the Stay the Course. One of those questions was about what the agency, does about with the information that shows that women or female students, are better off than male students in the intervention. And then the other question was, will the write-up or the publication that you'll do this summer address the cost associated with providing the community college case management?
Good. So two great questions. What to do with that information? I mean, one of the things I like to highlight as a benefit from these kinds of impact evaluations is you learn things about the program that you might not have realized that help you kind of dig into these things. Now, we can't tell you exactly why it is from the scientific evaluation, why it is that females benefit and males don't. We can tell you that it looks like, or that is in fact the case, and what that's done is encouraged the provider to start to dig into this. And we have a couple of hunches on this, and we're going to collect more evidence on this over time, and we're actually working with the qualitative researcher to explore this. So one is that all of the navigators in the program are female, and maybe it's the gender of the navigator being the same as that of the student that's helpful. But another is just the nature of the service that we're providing, that Stay the Course provides, tends to be one that if you're involved with social services more actively, you're familiar and comfortable with. And that tends to be more likely females than males. And so we're going to try to collect data to get at those potential explanations. And we also have similar interventions where the navigators, the case managers are male, where we can start to dig into this. And so this kind of information has been really helpful for the agency in terms of starting to dig into why the program works and for whom does it work, which is really helpful information. In all of these cases, we are really interested in cost, right? So the fact that you can move the needle is really important, but at what cost? And that speaks to whether or not the model is sustainable. So yes, when the report comes out, we will talk in detail about the cost of the intervention and how that cost compares to the benefits. So basically the main benefit's going to be what's happening to lifetime earnings as a result of this, and does the increase in earnings justify the additional cost of this intervention. But we're also going to look at the cost of this intervention in terms of the number of additional degrees it generates as compared to the cost of other community college interventions. And so can we say that this is a more cost-effective way at increasing community college degrees? And that's part of the calculations we're working on right now.
Well, great. It looks like we're right at the end of the hour. And I want to thank all of the people who attended today's webinar, for participating actively. I know, we have more people here at the end who are in than were at the beginning of the hour, so that's a good sign that folks stuck around. I appreciate that. And I also want to thank Jim for sharing this information. I know that this webinar came up because some members of the Management and Administration Steering Committee felt a strong desire for folks to learn about that. So we're happy to provide that opportunity. If you have colleagues who want to see this webinar and you're on it, we will be sending out the link to be able to listen to the recording. And so we encourage you to share that widely. All right, thank you.
Great, thanks.